Cool. So, howdy, folks. This is the Monday, August 19th, OpenJS Security Collab Space meeting. So, the agenda for today is to capture to better capture, um, to more thoroughly capture, I would say, more completely capture some of the lessons learned we had around S-bombs and provenance and attestation from the security guidelines exercise. Um, Originally, and let me share my screen here. Going back and looking at the history of the sheet itself. We had a number of items related to provenance and attestation, and none of them made it to the other side. They all wound up getting pulled out for various reasons. And so I wanted to more faithfully capture that um, so that we could start actually um, putting together a document that could be published and others could consume as we engage with the community. In the context of this, I met up with Alan Friedman at DEF CON. Actually, we met up a couple of times. Had a really good conversation. I kind of gave him a quick TLDR summary of the high levels of what we had learned so far, which he found really interesting. And he and I have an action item to follow up more, like in the weeds, to make sure that we're making the best use of his time because he is a very busy person.
So Red,
Um,
I had invited him to participate in
yep.
this meeting. So yeah, I think, yeah, opening that up for this broader group, I think would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm glad you
Um,
gave him more context. I gave him a little bit of context in Korea. So
yeah, we had a really good nerdy conversation about it. So
nice.
I think that really helped him quite a bit to get like level set to where things were going. And
He's
we
sort of
kind of
known as the S-bomb. He calls himself the S-bomb guy, right? In
Yeah, it's
DC.
pretty much his claim to fame. He's done other stuff too, but yeah, like I went out to dinner with some friends, and there he was having dinner with various industry people hustling S-bombs and stuff like that too. So yeah, that's kind of his jam. He's got other stuff going on too, but
Of course,
he's
yes.
got he's got a T-shirt and stickers and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, Alan's a really great guy. So yeah, so I wanted to the commitment I made to him was that like before we like super deeply engage, we have something like like he can consume and read asynchronously ahead of time to kick off discussion. So this is partially to we have a deliverable with the Sovereign Tech Fund anyway to capture these things for the broader community, but to help Alan make the best use of his time when he engages with us, it makes sense to write down our thoughts first so he can read it, and then we can go further from there. So there's a number of things in this provenance and attestation section. One of them was requiring signed commits, which was something that there was a lot of discussion around the security value of this. I think there were some really valid points around that, but ultimately, there's this idea that there's a bit of security theater to this. And Chris, keep me honest as I summarize this. And the issue being that while in theory, signed commits allow you to provide an open source project non-repudiation in the event that there is some sort of compromise of the project itself. In practice, we haven't seen that actual situation come up much, and it doesn't really provide value in the case of real world supply chain security attacks as we've seen them. For example, with the XZ attack, the perpetrators of that signed every one of their commits. So there really wasn't much that it could have done there. Um, Chris, was there anything else around signed commits you recall from our conversation?
Um, I mean, just like as a little bit of background, signed commits are more or less what they sound like, right? They provide a mechanism to say the person who the name, that you appear that you see in the Git log associated with these commits is the person who made them. Because anybody can configure their Git client to put any name they want. So I want to sign my stuff as Robin. I can put Robin's email, and make my Git commits, and it to the untrained eye or what have you. It looks like those are indeed Robin's commits. Um, so the risk here is that somebody looking at commits and who's responsible for merging would merge rogue commits that are associated with Robin. Um, so it's not a zero value thing, but you shouldn't be blindly, people that have write access to repositories should be reviewing what they merge, regardless of who the author is. Um, so that's the protection that it gives you, right? Is from basically from spoofing commits. Um, in practice, it's just such a low surface area um, for like an attack, um, and nobody does it. Um, I don't remember what the other arguments were. If there were other, comments.
I think that was pretty much the crux of it. I think there was more of a sense that people were oversold on what it was on the theory of what it provided, rather than like the downsides of it. So I think it was that moderation of like, let's just be realistic about this really, what this does, and whether or not this is a useful thing to ask given the value that it provides. Ulysses.
Yeah, I will say like in this case, it's like it's quite common to happen. Like for example, in the case of Node.js, when we do a release, we have different branches and so on. So we need to like bring the commits on. And sometimes we need to deal with like merges and stuff. And if we don't do the proper signing of that, you can just basically alter I mean, not just spoofing commits in terms of adding something from Robin where was not supposed to be there, like a new commit, something like already Robin did, but I just overwrite with my modifications. So basically you see like a
Mm.
legitimate commit, link it to a legitimate PR, whatever, change the hash on the history of the project, which is happen all the time, but you don't have any chance to verify how that happened. So that's why it's important also when you overwrite histories and stuff like that, you do the sign, because that way you can at least ensure that someone was doing that modification like in a conscious way, right? If this makes sense. But yeah, but this is tricky also because, for example, if you do a commit with other person, like co-authoring commits, then it's a little bit tricky because just the person who officially signed, I mean, the author is the one signing, not the co-author. So that can be
Mm.
also a little bit tricky because you don't have an easy way to verify that.
Chris.
Right. So yeah, that's like it's a very Ulysses' point is like it's like a variation on spoofing, right? Like he could
Hmm.
have done the initial commit, but then I come in, and even if I'm doing something innocent like a rebase, right? Because I can't sign it for Ulysses, then it's going to look like an unsigned Git commit. So, and any project that has some complexity or involves multiple people regularly committing is going to run into that. So you're going to end up with presumably unsigned commits. Um, it's not like this is one of those things. It's not like don't do this, but like to require it at a project level is kind of a difficult ask. Um, Folks are probably not going to want to do it, and um, even if they do, they're going to start running into these cases. Um, I don't know. I'm sort of wondering if it's required and then you have to do this rewriting of history. What do you run into? I've never had to run into it. So like Um, I just don't know if there's other like foot guns associated with it. So I don't know. I guess you could have it as a recommended rather than an expected for projects if you really wanted to have it.
That's Yeah, this is great. I'm just we're not really the purpose of this is to capture those objections, right? Because this is a big part of the story around attestation in general. So I wanted to just make sure we were capturing these thoughts here.
So I think,
Uh,
oh, sorry.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, what I think these were all the things that we sort of pulled out of your first draft, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so what I wanted to see out of this was like, hey, if we're removing this from the guidelines, let's just not have like missing information, right? Let's have a
Yeah,
section saying, hey, there's this thing called signed commits. Here's why you would do them. Here are some, issues, like Ulysses just talked about, for example. And because even if you're not saying this is expected, recommended, we want to have the information that folks need to make an informed decision about it.
yeah, that's absolutely right. I'm just capturing this in like kind of raw note form here for right now, but the sort of thing you're talking about, Chris, is the objective here. Especially so that we can have a balanced perspective when we're presenting something more broadly to the community. On
Um,
Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Do you have the link to the spreadsheet?
Sure.
Because I'm pretty sure I can dig up the comments from that,
Yeah.
just in
So
case
here.
we're missing something. And then I
Yeah.
realize there's lots of other things to talk about. So if you want
Yeah, it's all good.
to.
So the other aspect of providence and attestation that came up along the way was using the npm using the providence flag with npm publish. um, there were two major the biggest issue with this that I saw when looking back on things was that the most maintainers are not publishing from a theoretically hermetically sealed or some sort of safe one-time use GitHub runner, and instead that they're publishing from their own local machine. And the reason for that is primarily because of GitHub work. One is just history and not having all of the functionality, maybe not having all the functionality available to them back in the day when they set up their build and release process that they do today. So there's some evolution there. Like if process works, don't fix it. Um, the other big like actual technical barrier is that most maintainers are correctly using a two-factor account when publishing to npm, and GitHub workflows do not natively support that two-factor prompt in a workflow. There are ways of doing this, usually through a plugin that engages like a third party um, system to do that. But built in by default, that is, you can only use single factor authentication when publishing from a GitHub workflow. And that was considered probably the biggest deal of all of them at the time. Um, And I guess in theory, then, that ergo, having this concept of provenance from a system that's fundamentally not trustable because it's just some person's local machine undermined the fundamental theory around why provenance and attestation was valuable. Um, Chris, what do you, how does, is that a decent summary of things so far on that?
Yes. What was the heading of this issue was the maintainers.
Maintainers are publishing locally rather than from a GitHub runner. And like what makes it hard for us to ask them to start publishing from a GitHub runner was that we were asking them to basically downgrade to a single factor off rather than from a two-factor off like they're
Oh,
doing today.
okay. Yeah. So you initially had a item for publish from a GitHub workflow,
That's right.
the attestation. Okay, yeah.
Yep.
Yes, the difficulty in recommending that is indeed the lack of two-factor authentication.
Yep. But the other issue was that there's pushback on if you don't have that runner, then, if I recall correctly, then the whole point of doing the provenance attestation exercise was somewhat moot because you couldn't trust the system that it came from.
Yeah, arguments can be made in either direction because you're also trusting GitHub's runner to not be compromised. Yeah, there's not a great answer for this story.
It's better than a person's personal laptop, for sure, for sure. But there is the argument in favor of um, having that connection. But the challenge, of course, is the idea being that the provenance statement does give the GitHub, the npm package itself, um, that connection back to the GitHub project in an assured way. But that didn't seem to, at the time, the folks didn't really seem to see much value in that, I guess, because it still could be an invalid, there's still the idea that, well, okay, you can now point this package back to a GitHub project, but what does that actually give you in practice? There seemed to be a sense that even if you know what the GitHub project is, it doesn't mean that it's safe.
That's true. I mean, the vast majority of artifacts are published from someone's laptop, so that's not, I don't know that's, I mean, I guess the argument you're making is that the GitHub runner being like a container that is, specifically only running the software that is, dedicated to run there is different than everything that's running on a laptop that could be compromised by various things, which is a fair point.
There's also no assurance that the code that's actually being published from the laptop is the same as what is actually in GitHub. I think that was the big item, is that there can be a delta between the two.
GitHub workflows can alter all kinds of stuff before the publish is done as well. So
that's true.
You're not out of the woods.
That's actually really true. So, talking about
you could have a GitHub workflow for a repo that checks out a completely different code from anywhere in the world and then publishes that as the artifact. Counterpoint, publishing from the laptop, arguably less error prone for that reason.
That's true. That is true. Depends on your perspective on GitHub workflows, I guess.
There's like the whole other item about pinning GitHub actions to commit hashes as well for a similar reason, right? Actions can read secrets. Actions can be changed by somebody to do something malicious. And now you're publishing from automated process that's pulling in that malicious action. So like, yeah, there's a lot of different variables.
Yep. I think one of the core ideas from everything I recall Matt talking about with this, with regard to SBOMs and attestation, is to give some folks some confidence in what they're actually getting is what they actually want to have. And that root of trust is a critical part of this. But it seems to me that there's still, I don't want to get in, I don't want to, I think the challenge here is perfect being the enemy of good. And at the same time, what we're potentially asking folks to do is quite a bit of a lift. If their current publishing process is built on but one way, but then you have to instead have all of these other prerequisites set up in order to do this correctly in enough way that it's valuable, that actually provides value. Um, I think that's kind of the crux of the problem itself, because some of these things are not easy to do. Um, in aggregate, it's quite a bit of work to provide that kind of assurance versus yeah, it's the aggregate of things. It's not like one thing, it's a bunch of little things. Cool. Let's see. The last thing on here, let's see if we have, well, I'll do this one because I think this is the most complete one. Yeah, we can see where things got pulled out here. Um, yeah, let's bring this up. Is this the step security action? Yeah. So there is a step security action that um, the way this works is that it relies on step security's own infrastructure
Right.
to do it. So it is theoretically possible, but yeah, there's also other, if you don't want to do step security's infrastructure, there are other actions that have containers that you can run yourself so that you can run that instance like by yourself rather than relying on somebody else's infrastructure to do it as well. So in theory, a solution to this problem could be that um, either the individual project or the foundation themselves instantiates an instance where um, and then projects can then use that instance and use the action for that particular software to then do this. But yes, ultimately, it's not native, and you have to maintain the infrastructure yourself to do it. I'm not sure how that makes you feel, Robin, the idea of standing up infrastructure for projects to do two-factor authentication in GitHub Actions. But yeah, there's a reason we pulled all of this out.
Right.
And it was in like why it wasn't even mentioned as a potential option in the recommendations to say, well, I guess you could do this yourself, but um, it even if we were just recommended saying, hey, this would be a great idea, the idea of relying on step security's infrastructure or recommending that maintainers run their own infrastructure just to do two-factor auth in GitHub seemed I struggled with that. As well intentioned and as effective as this would solve the problem, but introduces other problems that are concerning themselves. Let's see. Chris, from our conversation, from our previous conversations on this, are we missing anything? I really tried to faithfully capture the points that Jordan made as well related to GitHub two-factor related to the change and publishing process, which is non-trivial for a lot of maintainers. And also the third one was around the fact that JavaScript already generates a package, like a lock file that contains dependency information already, but that dependency information is very local to that library, and that really it's not super useful once you get it into an application because dependency resolution is going to work out quite differently in context versus in isolation for a given library package.
Yes, all of that, and plus you need to generate your own SBOMs, regardless of the ecosystem. Different SBOM tools also generate different results.
Mhm.
So, you know, the value of like so, you know, we're talking OpenJS projects. JS projects generally published on NPM. So you're looking at the value of what does it provide if you have a file that contains your dependencies beyond the package JSON. It's practically useless for some of the reasons you mentioned about dependency resolution. It's not going to be interesting to anyone. Security scanners also, that's what they do. They look at the package JSON or the lock file. They're not analyzing SBOMs. And they're probably not going to start anytime soon. So the question is like,
Yeah.
who, even if you produce the SBOM, what's using that? Who's using that? The answer would probably
Yeah, the one of the value outside the because you actually mentioned like the primary use case for the consumer of an open source library um, is to be aware of potential vulnerabilities and the like in the libraries they're using, and their security scanner should give them that information. But at the same time, um, there's this idea in the provenance attestation SBOM space that in theory, if we had SBOMs for everything, then it would be much easier to have broader visibility on the blast radius of a vulnerability in a given package. So like if we have SBOMs for everything and that's published to the internet and available to everyone, then theoretically not everybody needs to run their own scanner to have that to know whether they're affected or not. And instead, the internet would just know because you would have all of the SBOMs tracing
so that
where everything is.
but don't we already have that? Like not just for JS with package lock, but like also for Java projects with Maven pom.xml. It lists the dependencies and scanning tools. You know, even Maven Central can list and does list. If you have a package, if it's vulnerable, it lists direct vulnerabilities, and it lists vulnerabilities that are present in dependencies. So you have all of that information already. We already have what information is missing. What does that not give you?
The sense I get is that we don't necessarily, in a central place, have all of this information stored for JavaScript. Like it certainly theoretically exists in NPM, but an NPM audit theoretically should provide this. But my sense is that there is a desire for a more vendor neutral solution to this
Okay.
problem broadly.
Sure. So, I mean, I think there is isn't there the open source vulnerability database, or maybe getting one of the words wrong. So I think we have that.
Yep.
But so you can like, now we've kind of split off into two things. One, we started talking about what's the utility of the SBOM, and now we're
Right.
talking about a centralized database of vulnerability information for the ecosystem. I don't think that SBOMs changes the calculus on the centralized database. Um,
This might be something where for another meeting, we specifically ping Matt to see if he can come and maybe better articulate that vision. Because the last time we talked about this, his view, and I know I'm not going to faithfully represent it here, but my sense was his view was that there are larger desirable things around SBOMs than just dependencies and vulnerabilities. There's also the attestation and trust aspect around that having that associated with an SBOM gives you, and also license assurance and forcing make by having an SBOM, theoretically, you also are answering licensing questions in a more um, standardized and holistic way. But in the context of this working group slash collab space, um, licensing has been largely out of scope and not a priority. However, it is a big part of the SBOM story. So I think there is a question on whether or not um, the whether or not we should also talk about licensing rather than just technical security problems themselves. And maybe Robin, that'd be a question for you on the scope of the security collab space on whether or not open source licensing is really an appropriate to consider for what we do.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, we had a CPC issue on a license scanning tool that LFX was looking at incorporating. So I think we kind of go back to the LF and see what the status is.
Okay.
The product has changed a little bit, but yeah, I would really keep it focused on, I mean, let's keep everything focused on security for maintainers, right?
Cool.
And what biggest bang for the buck, essentially.
Cool. Thanks for validating that, Robin. That was my sense as well, is to stay focused on security. Like, I understand that licensing is a big important deal, and it was a key driver around SBOMs to begin with. But yeah, that's a whole thing to itself. And I'm not a licensed guy. I'm a security nerd. I rely on the legal team for that stuff.
We've been
So
also pretty agile, like when we've, the project or the communities have caught license issues that they flagged for us and we've resolved them, so.
gotcha. Is
Yeah.
this is your sense that this is like I guess my take from the way you just said that is that licensing is important, but maybe not like it's not coming up so frequently that it's like a critical, hard charging, burning issue for the foundation at the moment, like that needs like very focused attention like that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Robin. I appreciate you being here for that. Chris, am I missing anything from the discussion so we've had? This has been great, by the way. I appreciate you all like listening to me while I kind of go try to capture everything we talked about before.
No, I think it's pretty fair. I mean, again, the $1 million question is, if I, as a project maintainer, generate an SBOM and commit it to this repo or publish it with my artifact, how is that improving security posture? It's trivial to do it, but like, why am I doing it?
I guess I challenge the idea that it's trivial to do it, because to do it correctly in the way that potentially does provide value, the transition to a build and publishing runner does not seem trivial to me. Like, maybe it is, but the sense I got from Jordan is that in aggregate, that is not a small amount of work potentially.
And I think we need a level set on, will it be a mandate or not, and how can we prevent that with some really strong arguments,
Yeah, I have trouble jumping to mandate when we're struggling to find the justification for in the first place. But no, it is trivial. I might be not communicating well when I mentioned that it's trivial to generate it. But it is trivial to generate. I mean, it's easy. It's a one-liner with a good SBOM generation tool like CDXGen, which does a cyclin DX SBOM. It just works. And you know, if you have it as a, you know, like a dev dependency for your project, for example, and it's literally just run this command and it runs really quickly. And it's what I'm saying is it's like, it's as a maintainer to ask them to do that. Hey, put this little line of code or whatever, or if you write a GitHub action, do it. Hey, run this GitHub action, publish this zero effect. It's not very much work at all. That's what's trivial. So like if it was useful, like if we could tell the story of how this improves your security posture and it's a good story, it's not a big ask. Like the level of effort to generate the SBOM and include it in various ways is a very small level of effort.
Yeah, I appreciate you clarifying that, because there's also the npm commands themselves to do this, which reduce the effort from what my take was even further, because then you don't even have to worry about another tool. You're already running npm commands. I think I'm trying to faithfully represent Jordan's perspective here from what I've gathered so far, is maybe the concern on effort was not necessarily on a per project basis, but rather across a large number of different packages. It would be like if you multiply that by 50 or something like that, then you're having a different conversation than just one package. Ulysses, I'd appreciate your take on this from an Express perspective, because there's a lot of different packages that you all are dealing with there. Even if it is just a couple line changes, what does that look like for you all across all of the different packages you all are on the hook for?
Yeah, it's the same concern, right? Everything is a manual change.
Mhm.
You don't get any efficiencies of scale, because like we have this trouble like anytime updating our like CI, right? All these different, we want to run, we actually want to run this new version of Node. Okay, well now we've got to update 50 different dependencies to test against the latest version of Node. So that's what that would look like, is anything that you did there, you would have to do it n times, because there's no way to scale. I don't know, there's kind of audit, at what point it becomes beneficial to like write automation to do this stuff, but
yeah, I'm very aligned with Chris on this. I think it's going to be challenging. Any of these small changes across many projects is a massive issue. Unless we came up with a tool that can help us do this kind of automation. But even, for example, if we do GitHub Action automations, stuff like, try to put like in one place and then control version it and stuff like that, so we can kind of improve, it's still to be a lot of manual work and changes later on. So it's not that simple when you have many projects. I guess the alternative is you go to a mono repos, which is also a common practice, but in our case is also complex decision and require a lot of migration and so on. And I think a lot of big and complex projects don't want to do that at all. So yeah, having a lot of repositories is not an easy way to manage. We need more tooling, honestly, for that. I think it's more a problem of tooling rather than a problem of requirements.
So when we think about tooling for a second, like the solution to this tooling problem would be something that one click goes in and looks at the existing workflow, assuming that it's not manually done and there is a workflow to begin with, and does a pull request to add the line, add the flag, and that would be it. Is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, because let's see, even if you wanted to do a tool that can do that, like for example, let's say like update an OTS version, which is just change the number, so you can do even a regex for that. the big problem of that, even if you do that change, you probably want to have like a pull request. So you still have pull requests and some active validation by a human, and then manual merge for all of those. So maybe you can do some tooling. But yeah, maybe we can use the GitHub CLI tool for this kind of thing. So we can generate the PRs and then, generate a tool to approve them and then and use the same tool maybe to also merge them. But still, in some cases, we might need to do some releases and stuff like that. That probably will be hard to automate. But I think maybe something in that direction, like a bulk operations on GitHub kind of thing, can be a good option. But yeah, I think there is a big risk on these kind of scenarios where you can end up doing something like this GitHub action will execute this remote wherever it is here. So that can be also a very tricky thing to do, because you can just manipulate that source one place and you pollute the full ecosystem and nobody will notice that at all. So that also, I think that's opened the door for a lot of tricky things. So yeah, not very sure how much of that, but yeah, I think it's a tooling problem rather than another thing.
That also introduces another point of failure, which you introduce another security attack vector potentially, but also another point of failure, which is also a harder sell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, also if you
Cool.
get any error on that kind of automation, you will notify to thousands of users, which is less than ideal also. So that also is the cost of many of these automations. So that's why many maintainers love to do to do manual things, because the same with the publication, stuff like that, because there is less factor of risk because an automation goes wrong or something like that, and you notify thousands of people by mistake.
Right. Like just the testing on it is like scary.
Exactly.
Like going back to like the publishing of the NPM package, right? Like, okay, I want to automate my publishing with,
Yeah.
whatever, when I make a commit to this branch, or, there's different ways you can do it, but it's like, okay, now you've got to write the thing, then test the thing. And then like every time you do it, you're going to be nervous about like what it's producing and publishing, and like, oh no, it messed something up. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's easy to have a very mature enterprise focused perspective on build processes. Like I've been a security consultant and I've seen how the sausage is made at a lot of companies. And there's a lot of household names that still ultimately publish quite manually. And companies that have not that that do that automatically had multi-year projects to get to that place. Like it was like a concerted C-suite level visibility effort to get to that place, and there was a strong business imperative to do so, where there was a strong perceived business value in being able to continuously publish and update the website. And this only counts, of course, for web stuff, though, like absolutely not for native client applications, of course, which overwhelmingly, from what I've observed, are still there's build pipelines for sure, but it's a hand cranked machine rather than some fancy thing from the future. So I think that's an important perspective that I'll also try to capture, is that yeah, like we're like, this idea is very mature even in like the commercial space where people are actually making money and there are profits and shareholders involved. It's still quite a lift. We got about 10 minutes left. Is there anything else we haven't talked about in regards to this that you think are worth? We don't have to go into detail of it now. Just want to see if there's anything else we haven't talked about.
You stop sharing your screen, but I'm taking a look. Is this?
The only other thing, we talked about runners. We talked about signed commits. Release tags seemed redundant. We have NPM Providence. Sorry, what was that?
No secrets and credentials and source code. We took that out?
No, that's in there for sure. It's definitely in the final version. I remember from when I was publishing it.
Oh, okay. I guess I don't know how to read this list then.
Yeah, with the spreadsheet is now, I think, officially deprecated. Huzzah! So yeah, but the in the version in GitHub, that's definitely in there. And then there was use npm to generate an SBOM and publish it as a release artifact, which we've talked about. And then there was using SigStore to attest npm generate SBOM release artifacts. And those are kind of just more specific implementation details of the larger idea that we have so far of those ideas. Um, so I think the only other big one that wound up becoming a recommendation was ignoring installation scripts for npm dependencies, and that the feedback from there was just the questionable feasibility of that
Oh,
because there are a number of dependencies that people would probably like to use or are currently using that require that to not break things. And so that was considered a very heavy lift because it would require people to potentially back out and change quite a few of their dependencies. Even though it's a very good idea. Ideally, if you're starting from zero today, you should absolutely turn that on. But it's more like established larger projects. The effort of doing that was seemed to be apparently non-trivial.
so yeah, the this protects you against malicious package that does some nasty business in pre or post install scripts, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, and then the trouble is that some scripts you need, or some packages that are not malicious, to work for them to work. Yeah, they can't just blanket do that. Yep. It's you gotta. Yeah, it's so tough with transitive dependencies, right? Because you can evaluate your direct dependencies, make sure you're using good stuff, but like you can't manually evaluate the entire dependency tree. Um, yeah,
Well, I think
so
that's theoretically the ideal of this SPOM exercise is to actually for people to do that, but that is a really heavy lift for sure. Um, like I said, I think if you're starting from zero today and building something from scratch, I think having that as a policy is great because you're already choosing your dependencies anyway, so you can since you're doing that initially, that's a time to make those sorts of choices. But it seemed to me like it potentially asking people to flip that bit on that setting was effectively asking for major refactoring potentially if you actually wanted to be true to it.
I don't know. I could see it being a recommended thing.
We did
Um,
recommend it. We did have it as a recommended.
oh,
We
okay.
didn't. Yeah, we didn't make it. We didn't pull it out. We made it recommended. And but the reason that was another one where, in regards to, um, that was another one in regards to SBOMs and dependency management that I'm gonna like kind of wrap into that. That I just wanted to make sure we were well covered on because it was um, it was probably one of the strongest security recommendations that got pulled out, frankly, um, just on practicality. So, is there anything else that we're missing from the SBOM space, Chris, that you can think of? I think we're pretty well covered, though.
Nothing I can think of.
Big jumps. Great. So next steps for me is I'm going to write this up in like a pretty and consumable way. Do some more documentation on the sources of these ideas, so I have a lot of that already from the original compliance standard. And then once I have that done, I will ping y'all to take a look see at it for any feedback on that write up, and we can take it from there with Alan.
Ben, you're muted. Or stuff.
No, it's
Sorry.
interesting. He doesn't seem to be muted, but
It-
couldn't hear
I have
him.
2 mutes because why not? Do we want to try and get Adam in early September or like second
Yeah,
week, somewhere
Let
around there?
me. Now that we've had this, I'll follow up with him on scheduling. I think what I think the pattern to do is to do the write up and have that done so he can read it, and then we'll have the meeting after he has a chance to read it. So I assume we're
Make
going to
sure
need to
there's
give him.
make sure there's a one pager, Rudd, or
Yeah, this is going to be
like
this is going
summary.
to
Yeah.
be yeah, this will have like a summary to it, and then I actually don't think the write up is has to be excessively long on this. I think brevity is important, and references and things like that can be um, down in the appendix. So yeah, we'll keep it
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Let's wait till
easily consumable for sure.
folks are back from the holiday and give people a heads up. So that would be great. Okay.
Yeah. So I assume once we have doc good, we'll give Alan a couple weeks to consume, and we'll have the discussion after that. Because yeah, like I say, he's a busy guy. So
Okay. I
cool
just wanted,
beans,
I
Chris.
think if we're
Oh, sorry,
wrapping on
Robin.
that, I wanted just to flag a couple of other things for folks watching. If they have not seen the Cyber Scoop article that posted last week with Christian Vasquez, it's a good read. It's a lengthy read, following up the social engineering attacks and the issue of sustainability in open source. So Christian had been working on that since April, talked to some good folks. So I definitely take a look at that. We've posted it on Twitter, reposted on Node and OpenJS. Thanks, Ben. And just one more thing, I did put in a grant application at Alpha Omega to fund our CNA work, to help, have Rudd continue that and Ben for 2025. So we'll see. We have some positive response, but nothing official yet. So hopefully that will come through.
I appreciate that, Roman. There's a Slack thread. I'll ping you in it again because I had some questions on that. So,
Oh yeah, I saw that.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
Okay.
So, yeah, thank you, Robin. Ben, do you have anything?
And yeah,
No, but
we have but following up on that, we do have an outstanding grant application to Sovereign Tech Fund for 2025 as well.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, always working on funding, sometimes spot grants on something specific and new, is a good thing to go after as well. So I think we thought the CNA would be not enough of a heavy lift that it would be a unique ask.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to do it. With the expectations from that managed
Yeah.
on, yeah, just because I don't want to, I don't want to like disappoint anybody on my ability to perform initial
Oh,
tier
no.
one triage
Yeah,
anymore.
on triage. Copy
Yeah,
that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Got it.
thank you.
Uh-huh.
Just want to make sure. Just like, oh gosh, I
No, I
don't.
think there's a lot of work though, and regardless.
It
So,
is.
Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Chris.
Yeah, speaking of which, what's the next steps on the CNA dealio?
Actually, I have the action item to give you all the list of training, and then you guys go and take the training, which is async, basically watch some YouTube videos, and read some PowerPoint decks, then we can do that initial outreach. There's some technical questions to go over still, but in terms of implementation detail around where we place, how we manage the list of disclosures and publish those on the OpenJS website and maintain that list.
Mhm.
So I think that is the only big unknown still is how we publish the list of CVEs to the OpenJS website.
I think a big lift is informing the projects in the CPC.
Yeah, that is but we can do that in parallel
Mhm.
to the working with Red Hat on becoming the CNA. So having stood up a CNA before, like the administrative process on their end we can be doing, and then the informing we can be also doing in parallel. And um, it's not like once we finish the administrative process, like, okay, we're just going to go straight up and launch. Like, we'll set a release date, a launch date, and we can just have that blocked on, letting everybody know, basically. So
Yeah.
there's no need to block the administrative stuff
Got
on
it.
that.
Okay, cool.
I just got into a back and forth with the GitHub advisory folks who are being stingy and didn't want to assign me a CVE
Really?
for vulnerability. Yeah, I can share it now. And so this is a JavaScript specification in the standard, and then we had vulnerabilities in implementations that were impacted by this. And they didn't want to give me a CVE for the spec because Mozilla had already reserved a CVE and assigned a CVE for their implementation vulnerability. But per the CNA rules, you're supposed to have different CVEs. And the different implementations, the vulnerability is, they're different weaknesses, they have different workarounds, they're not the same vulnerabilities, so they need to have their own. So eventually they relented, but they were still like, oh, we still think that Mozilla is in violation of the rules, and like, nope. I talked to the security head at Mozilla, we've been working on coordinated disclosure for this across the different implementations, and so we've all been in touch, and we all agree on what the rules stipulate and how this should be managed. But anyway, we would not have had this problem if I could have come to the OpenJS CNA,
Yep.
who presumably would understand this maybe better. I don't know.
Yep.
But it's this area of vulnerability disclosure, when like a specification is involved, is like a really interesting one, and one for which the CNA rules are not very clear. And so this has been a topic we've been discussing for a couple meetings now in the vulnerability disclosures working group in the OpenSSF. And we are going to be discussing this and related things again on Wednesday for any interested parties. So we'll have folks from the CVE board there to talk about this, and some other items on silent patching and how that works when you're doing coordination across multiple affected implementations.
Chris,
So,
maybe
yeah.
flag that for our standards collab space.
Sure.
Might be interested.
This is a fascinating problem, Chris. Something I wouldn't know. I'm genuinely surprised GitHub would push back on a CVE in a standard, though I guess it's probably not the norm of what they're used to dealing with, so it's probably just a lack of like familiarity.
Yeah, to be clear, they weren't pushing back against getting a CVE. They were pushing back because Mozilla had already assigned one for Firefox, and they said that that's the one that we should use for this as well. And it's like, no, it's not, and here's why. And the CNA rules are clear on this, or clear enough for our understanding on it, that each known vulnerable implementation gets its own CVE.
Yeah.
And the spec itself, yeah, it just becomes messy if you're just trying to have one CV to rule them all. And also, we don't think that that's good. But I will say this, to be fair, one thing that came out from our discussions in the vulnerability disclosures working group, by the way, the co-lead of that group is Madison, who runs the GitHub advisory program. And but one thing that came out of those was like, not everybody is going to agree on what to do there. And the CNA rules do leave some, I don't think that they should. I think this is a problem, but they do leave some things up to some discretion or interpretation. I think they can be clearer on this type of a thing, and I think they should be. But in this case, yeah, I don't know why, whoever at GitHub was looking at this and making their decisions, I don't really know why they were still insisting this. It'd be nice to like meet with them. But anyway, we're going to talk about this at least with folks on Wednesday. And yeah, it'd be good if they could be clearer about this sort of things. They're very clear about like dependencies and what happens when a vulnerability is or is not independently fixable and stuff like this. But they stop short of they do. There is one section on if a thing is, you know, affected by a specification of another project or product, they call it. It's the term that they use as product. But that's the only place, and it still leaves us wanting for more clarity.
Cool, that's fascinating, Chris. Thank you for the heads up on that. Alrighty, we are 5 minutes over, so I'm gonna call it. And thanks, folks, and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.
Toodaloo.
Bye.
Bye.